Also, the two this library is like super, super nice. I was driving like up in the Uber, and I'm like, yo, this is like, where am I? This is amazing. Like, it's so freaking beautiful, so gorgeous. It smells good. I don't know. I like being in spaces like eclectic, like spaces. I need to be in like more. Like I walked in, I'm just like smiling, like oh. It's like possibility everywhere. Like from the art, the knowledge. The security guard was up at the front laughing, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, he's good. You know, you don't want to walk in into like feel like you're in a club and getting pat down, like just to get into the library. Like I want to be in that point of life in 2026 where I got to get like frisked just to come and like learn. You know, like we have to take like the small stuff in consideration.
It's
in
funny
a great
too.
deal.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interject too quickly, but I think for me it's weird because I didn't grow up like that. You know what I mean? Like the library was like a safe space, but it didn't have to be protected. And the whole concept of because of where we're at in in this time, like what's required to keep spaces safe. You know what I mean? Like because the thing is, you don't want to go into a situation with fear, but also, if you're around a bunch of people who are already scared, like, how do you maintain that sense of safety? Because, I mean, I don't know how many schools in California have metal detectors, but I would imagine it's probably less than out here in the Southeast because guns are readily available.
Yeah, that's so funny you say that. I was literally like on like TikTok, and it's like this funny like thing where the kids are like, somebody put like the audio over. It was like, all right, all laptops out of the bag. Like it's TSA, like
my
laptops out of the
gosh.
bag, like but everything in the tray. I mean, like, and it's like crazy. Like imagine having to go through that, like, but the like even the structure of that, like puts you or imagine like that early in the morning, like that state of like fear is kind of like weird because you're not even realizing like you're almost being like what is it, dehumanized.
Yeah,
Yeah,
dehumanized.
in the space where you just want to learn, in that point. And like even from an architectural and design standpoint, it's like kind of weird because it's like I read all these stories and see all these like things about like pre 9/11 when it was like, oh, you could just walk through the airport, and just like get a
Yeah.
ticket and just go, or you can just like sit in the lobby and do all these things. Like imagine, like I wish I could have experienced that. Like why did it have to happen like right while I got older, where everything got so like super security and like everything is like that, and like. But it's funny also too because like you can joke about it because I think safety is the best when you just like make fun of it, but you still know in the back of your mind what you're doing. And that's the aspect of like being a male. Cause I'm like, when you telling me that, I'm like, yo, imagine like, you remember like the stop, drop, and roll like things?
Yes.
Like, yeah, you used to have to do that. Like every single like space that I'm in, like you always supposed to know where the exit is. You're supposed to know where this is, that is. And from an architectural standpoint, that's when you start to like understand like, oh, design is good or design is bad, because like everything is supposed to have like a human aspect to it. It's supposed to have a flow. When you text me, you was like, oh yeah, like I'm here in this studio A, studio B. Everything is so properly like labeled and organized, and everything is visible, and it's a flow. You come right straight to here. So yeah, that's so like interesting. It's just like lay out some blueprints and like the flow of certain things. But yeah.
So I wanted to bring up a couple things based off of what you said. So one, architecture being important as far as, how is it making you feel? So I mean, I think about schools, right? Schools, historically, from my understanding, were almost like, they were kind of designed to look like prisons, and like they were essentially daycare centers, right? For the parents were going to work, they were somewhere to like for the kids to be and be controlled. So what you were talking about before, like I mean, I'm 45, so I grew up pre 9/11. I remember when the airports were like that. Like I know, and that's why I think too. Sometimes when I mean, especially where I grew up in Mission Viejo, where it was very sheltered. I have a completely different perspective in many ways than a lot of people around me, where I didn't appreciate it at the time. I thought it was oppressively boring, right? I was like, oh my gosh, why do I have to suffer through this? Because I wanted to do my punk rock things and be a gothy girl. But now I really appreciate that, and I feel bad for kids because what you were discussing, like, get your laptops out, like, how much does that dysregulate someone's nervous system? And our schools actually looking at the design factor, like, okay, if we have increasingly chaotic situations, how are we using the space to be designed to counteract that? So if you have these kinds of situations, you can kind of like keep people in a way where even if they have triggers, they're able to modulate those triggers so that way they can learn to self-regulate, because that's becoming a problem in our society too. People keep looking to external factors to self-regulate when, I mean, that's why I think doing art, having meditation, there's studies that have shown in other countries the value in doing this, but we haven't really adopted it as much here in the US. I know there's certain school systems that implement it, some ones that don't, but usually it has to do with like how much access they have to grants, ancillary services, like funding. Because if you have a city that, you know, especially not even in the urban areas, but even in rural areas, there's a lot of areas, even of Georgia, that there's less hospitals, there's less resources for people, there's less money within the community to devote to this. So people are more concerned about, okay, well, kids need to learn like the basics. Well, art should be part of the basics. Meditation should be part of the basics.
Oh my God, yes.
Because if you're not regulating your nervous system, then how are you actually going to be able to absorb what's being taught? Like, why would you even be interested in it? You know what I mean? You're not going to be able to get into that flow state. You're not going to be able to retain and get enthusiastic about it because, I mean, I remember being in high school, and even though I had all these opportunities available to me, and I was a very smart kid, I was also going through a lot with my family. And, a lot of people didn't know about it. And so, like, I was in Model United Nations, I was in AP English, AP History, and because of those psychological issues, I didn't think about going to college. I was like, okay, I just want to get out of my house. I just really wanted to get out of the situation I was in. And, my parents were doing the best they could, but they were also immigrants who were working themselves to the bone to have this American dream. So I think about, how do we kind of integrate all of this, right? Especially with what's going on now. I think this is very pivotal because it's not between COVID, between school shootings, between all of this, how can we drive creativity and make that just as important as learning math? You know what I mean? And then even too, I've been reading about how some people are asking, why do we try to teach kids calculus when they should be learning business math? They should be, learning applicable math. And I get that. But also, the reason why we're learning these higher levels of math is because it helps us critically think. It helps us, it's like logic is a language, right? Just like if you learn musical instruments, that's a language. And it's not easy. And it requires a lot of effort. But when you do, the level of magic that it unlocks, because I think music is magic, personally.
Yeah.
And there's a certain level of alchemy to that.
Definitely.
So it's like, how do we encourage people to play with that and realize that, your mind creates your world and your actions support that. So if you want to be able to really enjoy life, how do you integrate creativity in every aspect? I mean, personally, that's what I'm working on in my life.
I love that. And on that note, can we just go ahead and say welcome to the Intellectual Lifestyle Podcast? Yeah. I'm going to give us a soft snap. We're kind of at a open mic poetry kind of situation. My name is Jv. I have my guest and co-host, A.M.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes.
Welcome to our world.
Yes. Welcoming the millions of listeners. Because you got to manifest that. The ones that we're broadcasting to that are going to be tuning in or tuning in. Yeah. So grateful to have you here. And I didn't want to stop that conversation, but I did want to interject on that because, you were just, hitting so many points because, all these things are intertwined, right? When we think about architecture, history, lifestyle, education, science, they're all intertwined. And that's what is, the foreground of what creation and everything is built upon. So when you were speaking on, yoga being taught in schools, I love that. Because, one thing that always stood out to me, I'm a very visual person. I remember driving on the highway. I like to really be in Ubers a lot, especially in the back seat, because I can just kind of just pace my mind. Ideas flow when my mind is going, and when I'm moving in emotion. And I seen a billboard, and it said, "Teach kids how to think, not what to think." Because a child, and even us, we all have a childlike wonder state that we never lose. We can turn it on, turn it off. But with that statement, what it did to me was realize that, hey, we are a canvas. And, a mind is a canvas. And it has to be in a great state in order for new things to come about. So all these ideas that you're talking about, your history, your life, the things that you want, the things that we all have that desire, we all have that capability, but the thing is to let the canvas be open for it to be able to be painted with, whether it be us, whether it be our inspiration, whether it be things that we picked upon, and the main thing is like freedom. And when you open up spaces for that, even in a design aspect, I think those things get inhibited, in that space. Like, I wanted to show you this, right? This is Werner Penton, right? This is a hospital that they designed. It's pretty much like painted. And this is the irony in it, right? So this is a part of the hospital, like when the patients are like, deceased, and they have to roll them like on the gurney, like through the hallway. So if you're looking at these colors, all the colors are, the designs are all different blocks and shapes and styles. But what it does is it makes that process more peaceful for transition. Because in a space like a hospital that is, and a school, like, let's be honest here, a lot of these schools and hospitals and jails, they're built the same way, infrastructurally wise. They're depressive. The lighting is very harsh. It's very, just like toned and like kind of weird towards your emotion. And imagine like feeling that in the morning. What does that do to you? It beats your head into like, oh, I'm in this space. It's structure. It's hard work. It's what somebody else wants me to think about, what they want me to do. And with this hospital space, why I love Werner Penton, I love design from Europe and all these things, because like what it does is it makes it more lighthearted. And the transitional space, it makes it more enjoyable, more colorful. Because that what that does to the human spirit is it can lighten the mood. Imagine doing that every day. That's not a tough job. Like, I thought about nursing and doctoring a lot, just because I love biology, I love the human anatomy, I love science. But what I had to realize is I'm like, yo, like, I'm a human. I feel things. I'm an empath. Like, like imagine me on the surgery table and I'm like, give this person some water. They need to be hydrated, or like, like all these things I'm taking into consideration, because like as a child, I've been raised like that. I was raised to, just take care of, things and the environment around you as well as you take care of yourself. So imagine being somebody, in that space every day, and, the design isn't even subconsciously bringing them up. So like you want that, and I think we have the space and the capability to be able to do that more as artists and as designers and just as thinkers too. I love like going into people's homes and seeing how their kitchen is organized, their bathrooms, and the colors and choices of the things that they choose, because it just makes sense, in that degree. And I think, that's such a basic level that we should continue to like live upon, and that we should start on, so we can be able to, just uplift ourselves even subconsciously in a space like that, so like, yeah, I'm jealous of you, you know what I'm saying? You grew up in the era pre 9/11 where, like you seen things that were a lot different, and I mean, I seen things a lot different too, even from like gaming spaces, library spaces. Like, do you remember like Barnes and Nobles, when they had like all the trees and stuff in there, and just like tangible things. We're such in a digitalized like age, which we can go into, in a bit. But I think, we still have to have something like tangible and physical that we can, touch and feel, that like makes us who we are and reminds us like, oh, that we are creative beings. We can do like very, very visceral things. And that we have already done very visceral like things. I mean, like, think about like the technology that we're speaking through. Somebody like had an idea like, oh, like I could record sound, I could record a microphone and, do all these things. And it's very high quality. It started from a point and now it's at this point. But it doesn't have to stop at this point. Like, it's only going to get better, and it's moving as time flows. So just imagine, like, the future and what's that going to be. But you have to live in the present moment to see what's not working right now in order to innovate. And that's the whole reason why, like, I'm like, yo, like, I see, like, I'm like, yo, linking up with you and having these conversations, this reminds me of everything. I'm like, how do we facilitate this? Like, this is what the Intellectual Lifestyle Podcast is about. It's about having these conversations. Because, like, if you have these conversations, then you're building upon something. You can break down something and build it and put it together, take it apart, and you build something new in real time. And it's so, so important that we do that as artists, because, like, sometimes the corporations can get in the middle and, take out that creative space. And we've seen that over time. We've seen homogenized items and homogenized design, like, how do you feel about that? you know.
So as far as like innovation, this is something that is kind of dear to me in the sense that, you know, growing up in a more analog world per se, you know, definitely not like, you know, people from like the 60s. I can imagine that as a huge shift, like seeing what's happened. But,
Oh,
you know, I always think of when I talk to, because I like to have friends that are like way younger and friends that are way older. I've always had that, just for having a good spectrum of thought to access. But just seeing how things have shifted to where like, to your point, you know, things are digitized to a degree that with, especially with AI, I have people wondering, is this video even real? Like, can I trust my own eyes? You know, like I have to be extra careful to make sure that like when I look at something, it's what I think it is. And that blurring, I mean, one of the things that trips me out the most, honestly, is like reading a lot of sci-fi in the 90s. And then seeing some of what I read become real. Like it's not like Jetsons where we have like, you know, flying cars or anything, but just certain things that I'm like, this is weird. You know what I mean? Like
I like
it's
that.
very Black Mirror, but like in real time. You know what I mean? It's not
like
a TV
that.
show. It's like this is life.
I love that because it's like, oh my god, like I'm reading about like what is that theory? It's a theory, but it's like, oh, you see it and it like happens or something like that, or you think about it and it's like it comes to reality. That has happened a lot to me, like, and I can go deeper into that because that's metaphysical. You know, you're working with magic. I know we were talking about magic. Like, you're working with magic. And that's why I think music is amazing, like, and visualization and classical, because it comes from that. You know, I seen this post where this girl was like that, like, where she put up, like, this PlayStation 2, like, sound. She was like, oh, this how the electric cars sound when they drive past me. And then she was looking at it, like, go across. And then she started looking up into the sky. Like, it was, like, hypothetically, like, floating, you know, out of space. And we're like, it's like, yeah, like, wow, like, look how far we have come. This is a dream. This is the future, you know. It may not look exactly like it, you know, how we read about it, but it is that, you know, like, but you know what I love? I love still being amazed by that because, like, it keeps the wonder, like, the childhood, like, wonder. Like, I think if you get too, what's the word, like, comfortable with it, then you're not innovating. You're consumed by it. You know, it's just like, oh, well, we have a Tesla. You can charge that up. You can drive. It's like, no, we have Teslas. Like, what? Like, and then it implores somebody to like think about possibilities that can be, because that's just one step. I seen on the scientific scale, they said we are like only a second on a historical timeline. We are only like a second into like humanity's existence, or the world existence, or the universe existence, because it's all connected. But we are on the smallest like fractional of it, and I'm just like, that's important because look at what we have accomplished since then. Like, I'm a Star Trek fanatic. You know, I love Star Wars, but, you know, shout out to all the Star Wars and Star Trek fans, but I love Star Trek. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
Oh, I mean, I watched all these shows, and there's certain obviously that are favorites. But one thing I was going to bring up is like, what I think is interesting now is that okay, we've gotten to a certain point where we have all these like, you know, techie innovations, and where like tech is our new alchemy, right? Like, you know, turning lead into gold, which I think I remember reading about. I don't know if it happened at CERN, but they were able to do that. But to me, like, what I think is interesting is going back to nature, because, like, okay, the first time I saw the French Alps, I remember I was living in Switzerland at the time, and my coworkers and I drove to a city called Chamonix, and when we were driving up, my coworker was like, Andrea, look to your right, because I was sitting in the passenger seat, and I look and I'm like, I don't really see anything. It's just kind of like sparkly darkness. He's like, no, look and then look up. And at that moment, I will never forget it. It's one of those things that becomes embedded in your brain. I looked up and there was just like this shadow of like, it looked almost just like it had diamonds all over it, but it was like dark, and it was the mountain. And I remember just being like blown away. I was like, how is this real? And it was like those moments I live for, because it's like the same feeling you have when you're little and you're seeing something for the very first time, and like you don't even consider yourself human. You're just so engrossed in the moment, engrossed in the awe of what you're experiencing, that you disappear. You as an entity do not exist. All you know is what you're feeling and what you're seeing and how monumental it is. And I feel like to me, like the architects that really like made an impact on, you know, the way I viewed the world were architects that would take the natural and try to replicate that, because like, I mean, we can play God a lot in different ways, whether it's technology or anything else, but at the end of the day, like, the most perfect form usually is already existing, and we're just trying to replicate that in our human way. But it's kind of like if you're like, I remember this one time I was hiking, my friend and I, we took the wrong way, and we were supposed to go on a 2-mile hike. We ended up going through a 12-mile hike, and I'm scared of heights, mind you. So
really?
I thought I was going to die, because there was like a certain like little ledge where I was like literally hugging the mountain. And I was just like, oh my gosh, we're never gonna make it out of here. And yeah, it was terrifying, because especially, you know, we were like, we could die out here. We could
totally.
I mean, this is like cougar territory, you know, and not the 50-year-old ladies that are looking for young men, right? Like cougar. So this was terrifying, and I was like,
they don't speak, they just growl.
Yeah, exactly. That they're like, oh, you're food, not friend.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, you know, disconcerting to be out there and know that, you know, anything could happen to me, especially because growing up in Southern California, it was very urbanized. One of the things I enjoy about Georgia is that you don't have to go very far to have a beautiful thicket of trees. Like, I remember during the pandemic in my area, which is, you know, like, it's outside the perimeter, but like, there was black bears sighted in our neighborhood, which is insane. And
still are.
We're still technically, I mean, like a little farther than North Atlanta, you know what I mean? Like, not that, I'm not like incoming or anything. So it's like, for there to be bears, I was like, oh, there's deers and bears and foxes and coyotes. Like, when I see coyotes, I mean, it's probably not advisable. I'm not gonna go and pet them, but like, I'm not scared. I've seen them so many times while living here, and like, I've never been scared, because they kind of look at me like, okay, you're just another creature, like, you pose no threat. You're like, you don't seem particularly appetizing. Maybe it's because I'm skinny, I don't know. But like, they leave me alone. So it's just really understanding the place of both. Like, we can have both, but how do we do that in a way where, like, you know, especially now, if I think about, okay, our cell phones, right? What does it take for our cell phones to be produced? Who, like, you know, unfortunately there's a certain amount of suffering, but most people don't want to think about that. So I think, like, when we think about, you know, where a river originates and where it flows out to, like, we should think of the same way of products, where there's a life cycle to everything, just like there's a human life cycle. There's a life cycle to these products. So if we're mindful of what we're consuming and what is happening to it through that process of consumption, and even after, let's say, one aspect of it is consumed, what happens to the rest of it? Like, how do we move through that? Because I think that informs the artistic process. Because when you're designing a product, when you're creating something, even like me creating upcycled designs, like, I'm trying to keep things from going into landfills for that reason, because I want to make sure that, you know, whatever the origin of that creativity was, right? Whoever designed the product that I'm using, like, their, you know, what their level of ingenuity doesn't die. Like, I just continue that process, you know. It's almost like passing the baton. And I think the more we do that, the more we'll, one, appreciate what was existing before us, but also see, like, what our ability is to move the needle, you know what I mean? Like, remembering our own power, because, like, that's why I think creativity is so important. It really reminds people of their own power. Like, we all have the opportunity to, I mean, whether you're making, like, dinner, whether you're making a dress, you know, like, everything can be creative. It's just, how do you approach the problem, you know? Like, if you have all these challenges, like, how do you meet the challenge? And
100%.
What is your process, right?
Oh my God, you're speaking, like, as a designer, as an artist, you're speaking, like, directly to the source of, like, the heart right now, because, like, that's all that matters, you know, like, especially when you're doing the thing. Like, it's just, like, you're really, like, playing with a Rubik's Cube, you know, in life, because, like, let's be honest, like, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just reinventing what materials, in which way they are used in the wheel, so that we can have a more successful and sustainable life, because, like, we have hit a technological boom in the last 60 to 100 years, where, like, things have moved so fast that we've been able to physically change the environment. Now, think about, like, how big and how small that is. Like, I was thinking about that, like, when you were talking about being in the mountains and seeing the mountains and things like that, because, like, that all that you felt reminds you of how big and how small you are at the same time. You're vulnerable. You're a human. Like, you can do all these things, but you're still vulnerable. And that's so important, because, like, once you realize that like you're in this omnipresence of what everything is. You're big, you're small, because something is small to something huge. Something huge is something small. Like ants can lift a probably a trillion ants could lift this table. You know what I'm saying? That we're sitting at like right now, like physically, you know, just because like it's a force and there's science to it. But what I was gonna say is that like goes to like how intentional the things are that we do. You know, I was talking about my Uber driver the other day, and funny enough, I had I blogged about this, but I was like man, my driver looks like Robert De Niro, so I'm gonna treat him as such. He literally looked like Robert De Niro, you know, and like it was so like just cool. I mean, I literally thought like he was Robert De Niro like at a certain point. Wasn't like ultra fascinated because I'm just like, hey, it could be, and that'd be fine. I've seen Taxi Cab, you know what I'm saying, in New York when they do that, but you know, we shared a lot of the same similarities as far as like, you know, talking about cooking. He was intrigued by my veganism, you know, because I told him, I was like, yo, I'm starving. He's like, you going to work? I was like, I'm about to go work on this burger, man. Like, I'm starving. And then we just started talking about food and music, and like, I was like, yeah, I like to cook with music because it's an art. You know, I like to figure it out. I like to get creative. I like to smell the smells. I like to try something new. I like to have an accident. I got this thing where a lot of times I cook and I drop food. I always drop, because I cook with mushrooms a lot, and I always drop 2 mushrooms for some reason. And I always count it as good luck. I don't know why I do it, and I don't care why I do it, but I do it. And I count it as good luck. So it's just like, that's my thing though, you know, like that's my thing. So it's just like, I like being in that space. And those are the times like where you're having like those aha moments, you know, because you're vulnerable and you're like, you're just opening yourself up to what could happen. So when you're talking about like cycling and building things in a sustainable like manufacturing way, like yeah, like even down to fashion, you know, like for some reason I've been able to like not shop for clothes like in the last like couple of years, because like when I do, I'm going on like Depop or anything, shout out to Depop, but I'm like going on there and just getting one thing, just one thing that I like really, really feel like resonates with me at the time, and then for some reason I get 1,000 outfits out of it. Why is that possible? Well, it's because like things can be made that way. That one thing can change your whole like perception. It can change your whole energy, from the way that where they came, from the person that you're supporting, to the people that are gonna see it, that are gonna get inspired. Like it's all these like little intentional like little things. So it's like once you're taking like that sustainability aspect and still being fashionable about it, you know, like Madonna has this thing. She said, you know, you can still be spiritual and shop at Prada. I love when she said that, because like yeah, that's an aspect, you know, because like, you know, it's like it's a small thing to a large thing, and it's just parts of the piece, which we all are. I think like the thing that you said, like playing God, I think like that is a playful thing, like that you should take account on. Not being like God has to be like a huge, like, oh my God, like a swallowing aspect. God can be just a detail. You know, it can be a thread that's a mistake and it turns into something else. That could be a God interest, you know, because I like to think of God as like a very childlike energy, a lot of like unknownness, you know, a lot of playfulness, and I love that. I wanted to show you this as we were talking about design. This is the George Lucas Museum that's going to open in on USC's campus. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it blew my mind, right? Because I was in California. Oh, excuse me. I think this was about maybe was it 2016? I think it might have been 2016. And I was at the museum and right at USC, and the sun. You know how bright the sun is in LA. I looked and I'm like, yo, what is this huge like thing that looks like it got dropped here from like aliens, like. And it was this, but it was undone. It was literally a terraformed building. It had like grass upon it. You could see through it. And these are one of my favorite styles of designs, because you were speaking about nature being built in with architecture. And that's one of my favorite forms of design, is like terraforming, because like you mix in nature, you mix in greenery, you mix in native plants, native insects and bugs and all the amazing things like raw airs, the bees, things and flowers, and you build it into a space that humans can essentially like survive in. And I thought it was just dope because I love George Lucas and his whole Star Wars atmosphere and everything, because he built the world within a world, you know, and he went against the grain, you know. I know people may look at Star Wars and think, oh, this guy just built something and was able to, it's like, no, he actually, you know, went against the grain and was able to like build a world within a world, which I think is really dope, because like it shows the possibility to kids, and especially in a time where like that time, I want to say in the 80s, where people, you know, were innovative, but like, you know, it was either money driven, or it was like, oh, this is too nerdy. This isn't going to happen. People didn't even believe the internet was going to be a thing. You know, to somebody believed in it. And I was thinking to myself last night while I was working, I was like, man, like, had I been born just like 20 years earlier, yo, I would have been so like, because I would have had time to spend with a lot of technology that we have. And I think what time does is it reveals like certain truths and solutions, because you can see the goods and the bads. You know, when I was playing video games as a kid, everything was just good. It was perfect for me. But I'm like, had I had the little bit more time to just be like, oh, this is not working, so I'm going to do this. That's where innovation starts. Because it always starts from a defect. Even when you look at so many different stories like Lamborghini, you know, Lamborghini was made because he didn't, you know, he got turned away from Ferrari. And, you know, he was like, yeah, I'm going to do my own thing. And then built a substract from something else, which is a whole world now. You know, I love world building. So it's like, oh, these things can happen. And when you look at tech and innovation, that's where things have to go. Everything doesn't have to be AI. Because, like, in my opinion, AI saved the day for humanity. But humanity has to save the day for AI to be able to exist. Because AI is beautiful. You can type anything and make anything, come up with anything, a full detailed thing, and not have to go to college or have to like buy a course or do all these like things. And it's just like, oh, like, yeah, you can do that. But you have to facilitate yourself in order to do that. You have to facilitate your space and able to do that. And you have to facilitate a sustainable space for even AI to exist in, because what it's already existing in is also harmful right now. You're talking about iPhones. It's amazing, but it's harmful at the same time. We have to facilitate that, you know, which is why I'm more so optimistic rather than, you know, pessimistic about it, because I feel like we can do that because we have it. But we have to take the initiative, or else like we'll be doing ourselves a disservice.
So you bring up, when it comes to AI, I was just watching a reel that I think her name is Caitlin Cook put out, and it had to do with Ray-Ban sunglasses, and I thought she covers a lot of trends, and this particular one talked about how there was a specific product that came into the market, and it's a great product, but ultimately it's not just the product, it's the product behavior that matters. Because, okay, so I'll use Ray-Ban as an example. So
Okay.
the Ray-Ban, like AI, the
Yeah,
sunglasses
the
that they
meta
have,
glasses
the meta glasses,
thing.
people can go in and record everything, right? Like, it gives you the ability to translate in real time. Like, there's so many benefits to having it. Like, I told my friend when he went to Tokyo, like, you should buy one. But then also, I personally didn't always consider, okay, what regulations are there to make sure people are not recording constantly? Because if they go outside and if someone goes outside and they're wearing one, they can just record anything. And like,
Yeah.
do we want that level of oversaturation? Do we want certain people to have it? Let's say, you know, a pedophile does that in a playground. Like, what are the implications of that? And I think that's the aspect of AI and the same thing, like, I was around when the internet, like, got big. Like, I remember, you know, being in school, like, I had a computer growing up in the early 80s. I was lucky to have an Apple computer, and like, I'm sorry, the Macintosh at the time. And yeah, I know. I'm really aging myself here.
Prehistoric. No, not you, because I was there too, but it's just funny. Like, I like that.
Yeah, Commodore keyboard, but like seeing like,
Doohickey.
you know, well, just even websites. I remember taking a web design class when I was in high school, and just, you know, how all of that has grown, but also seeing like the lack of governance and how that affected the way things were able to grow. And I was hoping that, you know, at least going through like the internet revolution and how that kind of progressed, we'd be able to have something different when it came to AI. There would be at least more thought going into like, if we're rolling this out, how can we do it in a way that the product, which is a cool product,
Mm-hmm.
won't affect society negatively. So really keeping in mind the product behavior, because, like you can have something that's really amazing, but if it affects other people, and this actually comes back to what we had discussed earlier, like prior to, starting up the podcast,
Yeah.
like artists,
into
right?
it.
Artists who are problematic,
Mm-hmm.
who, have really incredible output, but then you're like, wait, what are you saying? Like I thought about,
Right.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Ralph Lauren, they had a little bit of an issue like a while back, and they pivoted, they made sure that their ads are more inclusive, they changed kind of their marketing to make sure that like it was a larger scope of people that they were trying to access and represent, and that was cool because like, it showed growth, but then you have brands like D&G, Dolce & Gabbana, like,
Oh, yeah.
is known, just their latest rollout. Like, I've seen a lot of the commentary associated with that,
Yeah.
and it hasn't been pleasant because, I mean, it's very clear they have a certain aesthetic in mind, and it's not diverse. And they're kind of unapologetic about it. I mean, they try to pivot a little bit, but not enough to, I think, make meaningful change. And so across a lot of, I mean, I think especially with what happened with their, like with the ad that they had where I think they had, a Chinese person trying to eat pasta with chopsticks and flailing at it, and it was just really, really disrespectful
Interesting.
to to Chinese people. So like they've been kind of cut out of the market in China because of what they did.
Wow.
And again, like you have people who maybe are very creative and interesting, but their behavior is problematic, and because their behavior is problematic, do they get the same level of access? You know what I mean? When does,
Yeah.
at what point is like there a line drawn between innovation
I love this.
and like what is associated, what is adjacent to that innovation, and how does that, the people who are pushing that innovation, how are they responsibly or irresponsibly using the power associated with that innovation? I think that goes across a lot of different industries, a lot of different topics. I mean, we could do a whole podcast episode. Maybe that'll be our next one.
Literally.
But
yes.
I mean, it would be interesting too, like to hear what our listeners have to say about this, because I mean, I know a lot of my friends have opinions, and not all of them have the same opinions. But that's something that I like putting out there, because I want to know, okay, what is the spectrum of thought on this issue? Because I think the more we understand all the different viewpoints, the more we can see patterns, connections. Like, I mean, whether it's music or anything else, I'm most interested in bridges. What connects one idea to the other, and why and how? Because that's, to me, that gives a sense of continuity. You know what I mean? It like gives a flow. Like one of the things I love when I'm in California is driving on PCH. And especially like going towards like Big Sur, there's beautiful bridges, and you just see like very stark pieces of land and what connects them. And I think about that in a societal, aspect or scope. Like we have very different opinions, but what connects them, and why do they have to not be connected? Why not try to find ways of connecting them? Because if we connect them, there'll be that sense of fluidity. There won't be that stopgap. We won't find reasons to not do things. We'll be more inspired. We'll think bigger. We'll think grander. We're like, no, this is what we can do. If we just create that bridge from this side to the next side, like what adventure awaits us? And I want to do that. That's what I wait for with bated breath,
I love that.
in my daily life. So that's that's I think what makes life exciting.
Oh yeah, I'm like scrolling through my notes right here, and I'm actually like, cause I'm so grateful for what you just spoke upon. Like I'm moved by it, and it grounded me in a sense, and I love that, cause like it's just so, it's passion. What you speak about, it's passion, it's devotion. I think as I've been living these past few years, that's the things that have been resonating, like passion, devotion. I had to do like a scale on my life, and like really, really do a deep dive on like what it was that I was doing and why was I doing it. Because like artists, man, we have this thing where we go in this void and we just like blank out, and we create the best of the best of the best of the best. And we're so like happy with just the creation that we wake up one day and we're just like in reality, and we're like, what did I do? What happened here? Like, what was this? Like, I had so much fun. Why did I have so much fun with this? What is going on? Like, where am I? Where is this? Like, why did this touch this person? Why? And you have to go back and see like what it really, really is, what it boils down to. Where's the reference points? Where did this come from? Where is it going? Who did this before? Because like this like air sign thing that we have, like we just pull from the universe. Like we pull. And it comes from us, but what we're doing is channeling it. But we gotta ask ourselves, like, why are we doing this? Oh, it's because it's necessary. But why is it necessary? And who did this? And did they figure out why it was necessary and why did they need to do it? So when I cycled back and started doing that, it sent me through a great, like vessel, almost like a chamber of like artists and visionaries and intellects that were doing this thing, and what they were doing was really just innovating around them. They were like just seeing things and like pioneering things, and they were doing it like just with the smallest amounts of like stepping stools and materials and things. And like I think that that's a beautiful aspect, because like you're just building Legos at that point. But what you're doing with those Legos is like you're creating a bridge. Like you said, you're building a bridge for other people to walk upon, because like they may not have the capacity to facilitate what that is, you know. And like what you want to make sure you're doing though, building that bridge, you don't want to build a bridge with a gate that is like keeping like one thing out. You want to build essentially like a fountain that allows the water to flow and allows the sediment to go in the other direction, to where everything is supposed to be where it's supposed to be. But you have to just create the facility in order for that to be able to happen. And that's all we need more in design, is to just allow things to just flow in a space in design, to where like things can happen in that aspect rather than trying to take control. So it's like you're filtering. I love what you spoke about with like, you know, these different like brands and such, and like, because the opinions are very important, because the opinions are what the companies and the people need to hear, and they want to hear it too. But the thing is, they've made it so far down the totem pole sometimes that like they don't even have the space to be able to hear that and what, you know, people needed, you know. And I think that's important, because I always thought about this, like I never generalize things, right? I never put things in a box. I never put people in a box, race. I never do that, because what that does is it takes away the character of the person, you know. And like, you know, just one of those guys. I'm like, yo, you know, I understand that this is messed up, but what if I was able to have a conversation with just that one person in that room to be able to change that situation? You know, I was like, you know, this is funny. Like, I don't want to talk about politics, because I said, like, that's kind of like rule number one about the podcast. I don't want to talk politics, but in turn, that makes us talk about politics. I got this joke. I was like, you know, like, politics is like the party that, like, we got invited to by our parents, but the only reason they went is because the food was good and there was food there. And the reason that we like it is because food is there, and ironically, everybody's just dressed well. That's the political party, you know. But going back to that, you know, I was like, you know, I didn't vote for Trump, but it was funny because I wanted to vote for Kennedy, because I love John F. Kennedy's, like, his political, you know, stand and where he represented, especially like during the time when MLK was alive, you know. But I love his standard, Robert Kennedy, where he stood on food, because that is the base of all human things. That is something that we all get along with, whether we disagree or not. We all love to eat. And his whole thing was just take the little bits and pieces that are like really harming our children and ourselves out of the system, so that we can have healthier lives. Because if somebody can live a healthier life, then they have the opportunity to even change their mindset about something that could be just kind of crazy. No matter if you agree or disagree, you have to eat to survive. So if we're changing, making things healthier in a system, then we're doing things little by little, and that's what it takes in America. It's not going to be a overnight change in America. It has to be bits and pieces of medicine that we use to heal, because we have been ultimately like poisoned in a way, you know, even down to our food, even down to our water. You know, so I think you have to start with that aspect, and like, okay, we have to get into like the nitty gritty and just like go small. We have to go scientific. We have to go Bill Nye. We have to go Carl Sagan with this now. We can't go like, just like grand scale. We have to scale down and just like get back to what really matters at that aspect, and to be able to build something sustainable. So to scale back to that, and then I'm gonna let you continue. But I always thought, like, what if I was able to have a conversation with somebody at Walmart, like I'm talking about like one of the heads of like Walmart, and be like, hey, I think we should pull these things out of the market because they're like, or just change the design of the way the flow is in here because like this is detrimental, like it's too much sugar like in certain snacks for like children, and they know this. But I understand. I'm also compassionate because I understand as a designer. I understand manufacturing and structuring. I understand that once that machine is on, it's almost hard to get it off because there's a supply and a demand that needs to be met in America. It's capitalism. But we have to consider the small changes that we could make in order to be able to progress, because also if you have a lot of the power, you can not necessarily have to turn off the machine, but you can slow down the machine and then restructure and innovate the machine so the process can flow sustainably, not just for the system, but for the people that the system supplies, in that sense. That was one of the things that I always like thought about and considered in this crazy world that we live in right now.
So I wanted to go back actually to the Lucas Arts Museum. I'm very excited because I didn't know that was being built, and being from Southern California, I absolutely want to go once it is built. Yeah. But I thought it was funny because the design, at least the photo that you showed me, looked kind of like a mushroom. So I wanted to comment on that. That was cool. So one,
nice.
But two, I know we're trying to stay away from like politics because obviously they can be very divisive. But speaking of Star Wars is immersed in politics, right?
Oh my
and
God,
one of the
yes.
things I wanted to highlight is like,
yes, this is good.
They talk about like the rebel scum and like, why are they sacrificing this and that for? And I think about, okay, there are different forms of government. There's different forms of being. And I've recently because I used to be very anti-capitalist, but I looked into compassionate capitalism. And I know some of my friends are like, no, that's still bad. But I'm like, hey, if you're actively investing in companies that are trying to be the change and do good, like Patagonia, I love what Patagonia did. And for example, I don't shop at Walmart. I do my very best. Like, I think I've maybe in the last like 5-10 years, especially since moving here to Georgia, I've gone to Walmart maybe 4 times because I've always hated their business model. I've always hated, the original store that, like, I think it's Sam Walton started, like, I think it was like a general store. So it wasn't bad, but his children have turned it into this predatory monster that, like, the rest of us taxpayers, and, like, I've paid a decent amount of taxes in my life, and we have had to subsidize what their business model has created because they historically have not paid their employees very much. They advocated for their employees to sleep in the parking lot if they had nowhere to go because they're like, okay, at least you'll be, here at work, and we're not going to actually pay you a livable wage. So I remember, even in, the area that I grew up in, there were coffee shops. There was, like, when Starbucks came in, that shut down. Like, all these larger corporations, like, again, it's profits over people. And that, that is something that affects all of us. It affects the creative process because even AI, again, profits over people, and that's something I think from a design, from a creative perspective, like, we really have to evaluate how much we are supporting this. And like, I try to tell people, AI isn't just about ChatGPT. It's about supply chains. It's how life becomes more convenient for you. How much less you actually have to think about every little thing. Like, I think it's really interesting to hang out with homesteaders or people who are into like kind of taking, like, scaling back and living a much more simple life because if you're actually having to make your own clothes, create your own food all the time, if you don't have access, like, even like old, like, technologies before refrigerators were around, what did people do? You know what I mean? If you have to live in that space, you have to be incredibly intentional about every little thing you're doing. And I think that's a lost art. I forget the name of the process, but like, within Japanese culture, there's different perspectives on, the how and why. And like, there's one that talks about, and I'll have to look this up later, but like, talks about how, it's more about the process than the end result. Like, or even if it's something that's broken, there's still value. You add some gold to the, where it cracked, and then like technically it's more valuable because it has gold. You know what I mean? It's not this broken thing that you just dispose of. You just think of like, okay, how can I recreate it in a different way that's still valuable in my eyes? And I think that's the part with
Yeah.
disposability that I see in these larger corporations that like takes away. And even what you talked about with food, like. Whenever it comes to like politicians, I'm always very skeptical of what they're saying because usually there's a lobbyist involved. For example, like, Pilgrim's Pride donated $5 million to Trump's campaign. They're very big in Georgia. So, there's associated with JBS, and JBS is associated with Brazil essentially. Like I don't know if you know about much of these tie-ins. Like when I like to, if I'm gonna hate on a company, I'm gonna really dig in and understand like why.
That's me. Funny enough, like ironically, I just kind of figure out these things just by nature. Like I'm for some reason I always just gravitate towards the good stuff. I'm always gravitating towards the innovative, the independents, the indies, the pioneers, the people that are always doing things the right way. Now every now and then you'll catch like something, some kind of connection towards something else. But I mean, we're humans on one planet, so it's like of course something is gonna happen. This one person that's connected to this or whatever. But it's your choice. Like you have the option to be like, okay, like I'm gonna continue to do this, or I'm gonna do this in a different way, and just represent it or make that, put to the forefront. And that's the beautiful thing about being an artist is that you can do that. I think that's why Warhol was so important because like you kind of remind me of him like in your speech because it's like you're like kind of anti-capitalist and like Vivian Westwood as well too, but like you're still portraying this art that works in these mediums that is so tasteful that like educates that, but it still is like shows your individualism, in that standpoint, because that was Warhol's whole thing with the Campbell soup. Like he was like, yo, I eat this every day, because you got to think this man is like making what 6 figures in art, but he's living in New York and having to eat Campbell soups, and he just loved it. And he's like, that was his decision to put that on a canvas and portray what that really was. That's why art is a beautiful medium in that aspect. So it's like, yeah, you use your platforms in order to inform these things, hence the podcast, hence the post. And we are in a revolution right now where the artists are literally like making or breaking this thing, because like on every system you're seeing like people pick up trends and people are actually listening. Brands want to chime in. They want to find out like what it is that people want, and like there's always going to be politics in it because we are just people. We just have opinions, but I think the beautiful thing is to like have a tangible thing, because like you can argue with words, but like when it comes to design, you actually have to get up and build something. You have to put something like on the pad, on the pen. You have to like structure something, and like that's a beautiful thing. And with AI, that's the thing. It's like we have this tech that's just like just moving and moving and moving. But like, we have 3D printing, right? We could go and like use AI and 3D print like whole like houses in Africa and build like these structures and build, grocery stores and farms. Like it doesn't have to be like just on a phone, like we can let the machine almost build for us as we feed it ideas, but it has to be facilitated. And I think that's going to be the next chapter of what we get into technology. It's like really facilitating structure and design and art, but it has to be nuanced. It still has to be a purpose. And then once we continue to do that, we have to be able to sit and rest and like document a history of why we even did this. Why did we even do this? Oh, because there was a problem. There was a problem. Somebody was being like disenfranchised by this thing, by this machine, by this whatever, this lineage of history that we've had that's been violent, that's been non-subservient to the humanity in a sense. I have this theory. I'm like, if we have 8 billion people in the world, do you realize that like we have a planet essentially for everybody? Like in the universe, in the galaxy. We're not even just speaking about in the universe. But I'm like, it's far-fetched, but it's like if you think with an open mind and you think with a scientific mind that always like is amazed, then everything is possible. because I know people like give Elon Musk like a lot of flack, but like he's driven, he's focused. His team around him is focused, and I think what the thing is like is to not to put so many chips in the basket of the person, but in the idea, in the belief of something. And I think that possibility alone is what drives humanity just to be able to sustain, because you can have whatever you want to have, but you just have to have the belief of something that could work better for you, your person that's next to you, and the person that's around you, and just protecting that, whatever that is, because essentially we all want to survive, we all want to be here, but we have to like continue to believe in each other and not be so decisive, but be, or not divisive, but decisive on things that we agree on, you know, and things that we can actually physically build, and then talk to those people that have those materials and that structure to be able to funnel it back, you know, but so we don't have to close the gap, you know, the funnel. Like even like with venues, when we're talking music, to a standpoint, like I know that there's this thing like where like Live Nation, I don't know if you're familiar, but Live Nation is kind of like a monopoly. Not kind of, it is a monopoly. It's a monopoly. It's a huge monopoly, and it sucks. You know, tickets are driven, oh my God, to the thousands, where you could go see Michael Jackson for $20, you know, in a certain time, and it's like I'm fine with that, because I can support these indie venues that I like to go to and see the most amazing show, whether it's 10 or 100 people in there for 10, 15, $20, and support that system and know that my money's been spent in a space where like the community has been built around those dollars and the time that I spend in those spaces. But my thing is like, as the certain like gap almost seems to be closing, that like we could widen that middle ground and that middle gap to where these larger corporations could feed their resources through into the bottom end, and even say, hey, like, you know, like we're doing this thing at this stadium, but we're also going to give, you know, to the community as well too. We're going to give back, you know, to this smaller venue. We're going to throw some donation dollars over here. We're going to make, and not to take over anything, not to like build, not to like be like, oh, we're going to give you $1 million, like rebuild your venue. No, we're going to give you like $10,000. Just keep it in the safe holding so that you can keep doing what you're doing. And that conversation is what it bridges, is like the humanity gap, to where it's like, okay, there's respect on both ends. You're going to have your side, I'm going to have my side, but this middle gap we're going to protect so that nobody gets left out if need be, if they want to go over here, if they want to go over here. That's where I always stand. I'm like, you know, it's not like, I'm very much like a punk person, you know, in spirit, but like, I know the difference between like, you know, having a sword and that sword being a weapon or it being a tool, you know, in that sense, because like you want to have your toolbox for whenever you need it, you know, but you also want to make sure that like other people understand that too, so there's not like any like disagreement. If there is disagreement, then hey, it is what it is, but like you want to always open up the option, because the option provides like innovation and possibility in my standpoint and in my vision. So I'm just like, yeah, you know, and things can breathe. That's how things get meshed. That's how things just work. You know, I think the 90s and the 80s were perfect for that. It was like counterculture, and like things just worked. They just happened, and like you could be that person, you could be that person, you could be that person. We all respect each other, you know, respectfully, you know.
So I have a slightly different, I guess, perspective, because I mean, growing up in the 90s, even from like a music subculture standpoint, like it was very hard to be multiple things. Like there was people weren't exactly multi-hyphenates. You know, you didn't have as many people clamoring to be polymaths. Like you had your silo, and that's what you were. And if you, like, there was the whole concept of the poser, right? Like, if you especially like within like any sort of alternative subculture, like if you were one thing, you were that. And if you tried to branch out to someone else and be like, oh, you're not really what you're saying you are, you know? And I see kind of the same thing today, where it's like people are held to a certain standard, and you know, it's hard to diverge from that. One of the artists that I really respect, David Bowie, one of the things I loved about him, I still love, is that he was a musical chameleon. Like most of the artists I would seek, I would call them bandwagon jumpers. I'd be like, oh, they're not really true to their craft because like they're. But with him, what I loved about him as an artist is that he really tried to see the value in the art itself. You know what I mean? And it was less about him taking it to become like, this is mine, as simply like, hey, this is just the way I'm reflecting it back towards all of you. I think this is super cool. I love that I have access to it. I'm going to put it through my lens and then reflect it back. So that way it's just another aspect of this, but he didn't necessarily take ownership in the same way.
Oh, yeah.
And you brought up Elon Musk, who, like, honestly, I do not like because of the predatory way that he approaches, what he's doing. It's like, it's more Machiavellian. It's more the end justifies the mean. As long as I make this specific tech, if humans or animals are abused in the process, that's kind of how the cookie crumbles.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people, again, profits over people. I think that you can have nice things, but especially me being like more into like punk, musical subcultures and so forth, like, it's funny that I actually like rules. I think rules are good because they remind you these are safeguards. It's like, for example, when you're on the road and you're going, let's say, on a bridge, right? If you don't have the guardrails, like, sometimes, it's almost just the visual reminder, hey, like, you need to stay in the lane so that way we can all be on the road, right? You don't have to stay in the lane forever. You can, go into a different lane. You can get off the highway. You can go exploring. You know what I mean? That's your choice. But while you're in a space where you have to share the road with other people, it's good to remember, like, we all have to be respectful, and that's something that I'm trying to remind myself too, because there's times where I'm driving, and I'm sorry, Georgia, but Sunday drivers, like, I don't mess around with my driving. Like, I'm much more like, I think I was in your cabbie in a past life, so I want to get there yesterday, and so I'm just like, why are these people moving, right?
Oh my God.
I've had friends who have a more Buddhist like, I guess, slant, so like they're thinking, we're like, hey, your urgency is no one else's urgency.
Yeah.
Just because you want to go faster doesn't mean other people are required. You are sharing that road with other people.
Yeah.
There are multiple lanes for that reason. And if you don't want to drive on the 2-lane highways, don't go to those places. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to be in a space where, it's people who predominantly are driving slower, then, like, come correct. Read the route and understand that, like, you're going to have to acclimate if you want to have access to that. And that's the other thing, too, that I think is important, just remembering, like, whether it's from a cultural standpoint, a technological standpoint, if we want to have certain things, like, we have to understand, like, again, product behavior, like, how is this going to affect not just what I want, but what everybody else, what their buy-in is, too. And sometimes that can be chaotic, and then navigating that is not fun,
Yeah.
But the more I think we try to understand, give space to that, the more, like, compassion we'll have for ourselves too, because I know for a fact I'm very hard on myself, but, like, most of the people I've known who have done cool things, they've also been really hard on themselves. Most artists I know are really freaking hard on themselves.
It's nuance. It's literally nuance, and, like, I'm gonna just cycle back and say, like, I think I think just in our experience, we agree on the same things. We also disagree on the same things. It's just the perception of how we approach those things. Because I'm like, those things are the things that people are talking about. How do we do this? People just want to know how. Like, we want this separate thing, but how do we do it? But that's the creativity. It's the threshold. I love when you said, like, there's a guardrail right here. That's design. Somebody thought for somebody else. Like, it's Happy Aquarius season, by the way. I just recently learned, this was like last year, those like little yellow stamps, they're like on the ground. They're for handicapped people. They're like the little studs when you walk up the street for like the little bumpy things and such like that, for like crutches and blind spots and stuff. This Japanese designer created that. I'm going to pull up his name so I can like cite it, but I just learned that he created that. He was an Aquarius. And, as I study like people in design, I'm like, yo, like, it's that one little thing that, like, it may not have a name, it may not have a anything, but it affects you every single day. That was a design choice, and it's everywhere, and it benefits, and we pass by every single day. But it's that small choice that somebody like created and designed to be able to like have a threshold for like a safe hope for the people. So I fully agree with you saying, because like I'm not for like the collateral damage. I don't believe in like, oh, like, these people are gonna die and like, but this will happen and this will survive. Like, I know it's true because of evolution, but I don't like to just accept that. I want to see if we can save as many people as possible and give them an opportunity, because when you think like that, you start to think intentionally, you start to think creatively for the person that may not be able to think for themselves, in that sense. So I love that aspect, and like, these things are happening. People do care. I just think the discourse has to happen more to where it's not just being made in the boardroom with people in suits who are just trying to clear a check and clear a check and clear a check. That's so mundane. That's so boring. That's so like dead. That's so not us anymore. Like we're out of that phase. Like we should be like scaling back and getting creative, putting our hands on things, and like, because Steve Jobs was that way. I seen it. Thing about him where they said, he pretty much fractioned out his time where like, if this everything else is noise compared to what I'm trying to do. And he was very harsh about those things. In turn, he got a lot done, but his practices were, they were harsh. His way of being was like harsh towards people. And I think that's where we can make like certain changes, and just involving a lot of people in the thing. And I think that just turns to like back to what you were saying earlier, which I freaking loved. You were just speaking about nature. Just turn it back to nature. Like we can turn it off and we can just like study that again. We can study like just the things that flow in the time and space aspect. And like we should really be building upon those things, because like when you look at terraforming, you look at earth ships, you look at people in Arizona that are building their homes out of sustainable tires and sands. What they're having to do is kind of common sense. But the factors that be, when they're having to go through legislature and they're having to go through all of these like things and rules and regulations, it's going against that, because they're having to like pretty much fight with the government just about building something like ants do. Ants build earth ships. They build colonies. Nobody's like arguing with them about that. So why are we doing it? Like we have to, that's why I said we have to kind of go back in time. We have to slow down. We have to scale back and see what we were doing right before it went wrong. And that's just like that's having to be the rebel and be the visionary at the same time and be punk, you know what I'm saying? And be with your community, be like, here and there, and write about it, document it, and just go at full speed in that direction. But be polite and be respectful about it, but like know that like you're standing on solid ground when you do that. Like, and you can lift off. You're still floating when you do that. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's how things like really get done, because they've always been that way. So I think that you have a great like just standpoint, and where you see it in the world and where you see design, where you see everything standing, because you've seen it. I think now is just like that kind of time to shine and just continue to show that, continue to voice that, and just build upon that. It's a great space, to be in.
Hey, this is JV. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to the Intellectual Lifestyle Podcast. I want to give a great shout out to the Gwinnett Library Center. I want to give a great shout out to my co-host and guest, A.M. Thank you for listening and tuning in. We will continue this episode. Thank you so much. At this time, I like to try something different. This is going to be a segment of the show where we simply just take a deep breath for 3 seconds and exhale. This is the time to where you can take notice to your thoughts. Inhale and exhale the good things in, let everything else out. Thank you for tuning in once again. I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Intellectual Lifestyle Podcast.